Grand Bear Diner was located between Mill City and Glendive, 20 miles out of Highway 94 in Montana. There was no competing eatery for roughly 30 miles in all directions, just 2 gas stations until Highway 94. That was it. Quite literally, their way or the highway. A small strip of road fed into the diner's parking lot on one end and spat visiting vehicles out of the other. Cops and truckers frequented the Grand Bear in great numbers. An occasional hitchhiker or student would stop by, maybe even a family on the road, but they were by and far the rarest visitors. This steady stream of customers kept the lights on and paid bills pretty well in the third of the century. Alas, management had changed at the turn of the decade. The 2020s saw the original owners retire and sell their wonderful business to a new family. They spoke mostly over the phone and only met the buyers a handful of times. Quiet and nice seemed to be their best qualities. When the owners, the Chows, saw the price offered, they astutely accepted. Leaving behind 3 decades of their proud work, the Chows bid goodbye and good luck to the strange new family, wishing them well in whatever endeavors came their way. Entering through the double doors on the first day of business under new ownership was a rather hungry young man, a college student no doubt. Patches of freshly fallen powder paraded all along his jacket and jeans. This part of Montana was covered harshly in snow this time of year, especially out of near this part of the wilderness. Nature in these parts was like beautifully breathtaking countryside, finely sprinkled in a crystal coating. This supposed college student had square-rimmed glasses, pale skin, and light brown hair. Stubble formed into a beard silhouette, lined his face like a colony of ants marched into an anthill. He was tall and McClellan. When he shook loose the snow, his body twisted like some kind of gnarly, knotted tree. On his shoulders was a backpack, lending credence to the possibility of him being a student, although a hitchhiker was also possible. There were not many other diners there at the time. No truckers squeezing into seats or cops sipping coffee behind combed mustaches, professing their stereotypical love for donuts. Just this visitor, and of course, one of the owner's children. According to the flashy golden rectangle affixated to her shirt, her name was Ray. She had coarse, black hair, shinier and longer than an eel. Her eyes were small and friendly. Her skin was white as the snow falling outside. She was petite and skinny.
Hello, my name is Ray. I'll be your server today. Is it just you?
Yeah, just me. Ray, and as in ray of sunshine?
No, not like that. You're funny.
Thanks.
The student intoned, perturbed by her bubbly disposition.
Would you like a seat at the counter?
Responding in the negative, he followed Ray as she guided him to a booth. The student gladly sat down, flipping open the menu the instant Ray put it down. He requested a cherry soda before deciding what he would have. It was still morning, only 10 past 11, so breakfast was not entirely out of the question. He perused the selections as Ray came back with his drink. Closing his menu, he smiled and told that he would like 3 eggs, scrambled with onions, and country biscuits with sausage gravy. She scribbled the order down on a notepad, thanking him before taking his menu. Walking behind the counter, Ray ripped the piece of paper with the order on it, sticking it where the chef could see it. The student could not make out what the chef looked like. Based on the silhouette, the person was a male with a medium build. Not knowing why he was even curious, the student turned back around, folding his hands, gazing out one of the Grand Bear's big windows. Snowfall had halted. How the white played off the light made the scenery look marvelous, magnificent, on trees on the side of the road and in the mountains. Since nature got boring, the student took out a tablet out of his backpack. He powered it on, hitting the internet app the moment it loaded. There was no signal. He turned to see Ray bringing his food, figuring he can ask her where a guy could get some Wi-Fi in these year parts. She put the place before him, steam rise and wafting aromas. He begged her pardon to trouble her for her Wi-Fi password. Ray was sorry to inform that there was no Wi-Fi here. She was tempted to add that there would not be anywhere for miles that had a signal, but she thought it'd be wiser to maintain the facade of possible internet access, as she relied heavily on tips. The student hastily moved his tablet back into his backpack, nestling between a physics and math book. It's like 1995 up in this turkey, he joked mentally. He placed the backpack to his side, laughing and thinking about how it would make the worst carpool dummy ever. He drank some of his cherry soda, keen on getting started. Loaded with gravy, he picked up on one of the biscuits. He piled some of the scrambled eggs on top of it, devouring it thoroughly. Then, he ate the eggs separately, followed by some more of the sausage gravy biscuits. It was wonderfully fattening and wonderfully greasy, caressing his palate with feel-good flavors. He washed it down with some cherry soda, adoring the effervescent sensation it gave off. Then, something was wrong. The air seemed to move in waves. Furniture seemed to shake. Queasiness swirled in his stomach. Dizziness started faintly before crescendoing into a full-on vertigo. The student dropped his fork, and his soda glass shattered into countless pieces. His breathing was coming out in winded, wheezing gasps. He tried to leave the booth, getting some ground before collapsing to the floor. The tiles felt cool against his hot, perspiring skin. His toiled breasts were hitting the floor before being bounced right back to him. Looking up, he saw Ray. She smiled at him tauntingly as he spiraled into a world made on giant canvas of psychedelic pain. The student went to sleep and never woke up again. Wednesday of that week was slow as Monday. Tuesday had cleaned the house. Peak hours had upwards of 10 to 12 customers. Even a slow flow had at least 5 diners an hour. Some of Ray's friends came to sub as waitresses. Her father, Nac, who was also co-owner, had paid them $14 an hour onto the table. Pretty good money for waitresses going through college. Nac would require them to pool their tips for the day. He would then give each waitress 20%, his daughter 10, his son 10, and the remaining 20% went to the diner. The waitresses were not thrilled about this, especially since one thought they could outcharm the other and collect the biggest tips. But they supposed that was okay. Other restaurants would pay them minimum wage, $9.50 per hour if they were lucky. The diner was a cluster of rushed waitresses, an overburdened cook, a phenomenally patient hostess, chatter, food splatter, gossip, crying, whining, screaming, reading, feeding, children pleading, guffaws, hee-haws, happy birthday applause, and, of course, dessert. That day was very, very good for all involved. But that was Tuesday. Today was Wednesday. 8 in the morning, and not a soul strolled through that door. Things changed at about 20 past 8. A big truck with the long silver cylinders on the back pulled into the parking lot, hauling gasoline. The driver was a rotund man in his late 40s with a graying beard that was otherwise light brown. His hair, the same shade of otherwise light brown, jutted out in spiky points under the bottom of his grease-stained green baseball cap. He wore a checkered blue and white shirt, partially underneath a black vest. Ribs and spots of dirt underscored his old blue jeans. As the truck driver lumbered on over to the Grand Bear, his rather plump arms swayed minutely in both directions. A light, regular snow blew that morning, only strong enough to frost his eyebrows and hair gingerly, nothing more. The sun only made cameo appearances that day, commenting to himself about how friggin' cold the metal door handle was. The visiting the truck driver walked inside. He was greeted by Ray. Her mother Nid was cooking behind the counter. Funny how she seemed to be the only cook on slow days. At least, that was what her husband thought. Ray politely guided the truck driver, encouraging him to take a seat anywhere he would like. He selected a seat at the counter, sitting on a stool somewhere in the middle. Ray put his menu on the counter, inquiring what he would like to drink. The truck driver said that water would be okay. He perused the menu. His trucking route took him all over the cross the country, on many occasions in Montana, and of those often along Highway 94. Yet, he had never run across this place. Everything looked so appetizing. Ray brought him a glass of water with no ice. There were too many cold things in these parts. The truck driver was ready. He ordered a stack of buttermilk pancakes, 2 strips of bacon, 2 sausage links, and 2 eggs, sunny side up. Ray wrote his request down. He handed her the menu, and she thanked him before disappearing behind the counter and into the kitchen. She hung up on the order and started conversing with her mother. The truck driver watched. When things appeared to get heated, Ray pointed in the truck driver's direction. He chortled quietly, not minding. Having 2 daughters of his own, he knew exactly what it was like, even when they were adults. One word buzzed in his brain, like a bumblebee trapped inside of a jar. Drama. A newspaper rack stood near the door. There was an adjoining lottery machine. With nothing better to do, the truck driver gets off his seat and moseyed on over in that direction. 4 newspapers sat in their own square display. 3 of them were $1. The last, $1.50. 2 seconds decided led him to choose one of the cheaper newspapers. $1 was already bad enough, but $1.50 was a define no way. 0 time was wasted getting over to the lottery machine. Putting his chosen newspaper under his left arm, the truck driver plucked a 20 out of his wallet. He inserted it into the slot, only to face rejection. Either the machine was a piece of garbage or, in God's way of saying, do not gamble. So, he tried again. Twice it failed to eat his money. The truck driver angled the 20, feeling they could finally catch and slide into the machine. Once the display had told him that he had a $20 credit into his tickets, 2 $5 and 5 $2 scratchers. He scooped them out of a tiny tray at the bottom, neatly shoveling them into his pocket. He came back to his seat with the newspaper. In the absence of the employees, he began to read. He reasoned it was okay for them to pay their $1 when they returned. It was nice to be in a state with no sales tax. The little things in life, you know. Before any serious reading could be done, the funnies needed a nice once-over. Crossword puzzles and trivia dwelled there too much. Much to his chagrin, this newspaper carried full-color funnies, only on Sundays. He would make do with good old black and whites just like he did when he was a kid. Something started to poke at his side. This puzzled the truck driver. It was not like bugs thriving in the cold. Maybe the occasional spider, but that was rare. He turned to his side to see what was wrong. Briefly, he saw someone pulled away from him with something in their hand. He tried to look, but started to feel sick. His body became numb. He froze up. Falling off the chair into his back, the truck driver got weaker. His vision became blurred by the second. A figure stood over him. Amid all the blurredness, her smile was clear and deceitful. The truck driver could not believe what he had done to deserve this, and he had not even had a true taste yet.
I guess your luck ran out today, huh?
Ray asked, smiling sadistically. On the following Monday, there was a third slow day since the new family had taken ownership of the Grand Bear just a week prior. Other than newspaper deliveries, the diner did not see any foot traffic. A black cat clock with a pendulum tail and shifty eyes indicated that noon neared. Nac was not pleased, grunting under his breath in angry Morse code. Nid was optimistic about business picking up. Rain was moistening the landscape, a pleasant change of pace from all the snowy weather. Ray was bored, nonchalantly flipping through her smartphone like she had not just recently drugged 2 men. She had internet on her phone that she had to pay extra for, spitting the diners like a Wi-Fi. She looked up momentarily from the screen, happy she did. A woman was running across the parking lot. The rain had picked up, not quite in sheets, but more in plethoric, pinging precipitation. She ruled this day for not having her umbrella. The woman opened the door quickly, paying no heed to how cold the handle felt. She was drenched, her naturally curly blonde hair soaked into the streaks and sopping wet. Ray greeted her warmly, all the same. The woman went to sit down at a booth. Before Ray could hand her the menu and ask if she would like anything to drink, the woman demanded coffee, wanting it as hot as they could make it. Ray set the menu downside beside her and hurried off to get coffee. The woman took some napkins from the dispenser, drying her soggy forehead and cleaning up her running makeup before it ran all the way home. After drying her hands, she left the balled up napkins on the table and started to look at the menu. Ray came back with a cup of coffee and some creamer. She set them both near the woman. Laying her menu down, the woman prattled off her selections. A bowl of fruit, 2 eggs, whites, and 2 whole grain English muffins. Ray smiled, copying it down before swiping the menu. Her smile quickly faded, thinking how this woman must be some kind of health nut. Ray went to ask her dad for some fatherly advice. Nac looked at the woman from the kitchen, thinking how pretty she was with her golden hair and blue eyes. But she could just die, just like the others. Plus, he was married, and he did not need to die himself. He was plenty mad and had to take it out on someone. Nac assured his daughter that there was no need for drugs this time. He would have no problem taking her out.
Tell your mother not to bother with the food. We cannot keep your brother waiting, so this will have to be quick.
Nac instructed her, primed and ready to go. The woman sat at the table, drinking the coffee. It was perfect with 2 drops of cream and a dash of sugar. She was already feeling warmed up, somehow drier too. The woman had some magazines in her tote bag. 3 of them did not survive the downpour, and she planned to discard them later. 2 were perfectly dry, and 1 was damp on the edge of the pages. While hard to flip from page to page, it was manageable, which was good because it was her favorite before she began. The woman gargled, her subdued screaming scarcely escaping. Nac had her by the throat. He was behind the booth, not a tall man. Nac had to stand up on his toes to see what he was doing. His weapon of choice? An extension cord. It had been quickly and flawlessly wrapped around the woman's neck. This was in no way his first rodeo. Nac pulled with all his might. He was getting weaker as he got older, his golden years glowing on the horizon with some warm but unwelcome visitor. He knew he could still do it. The woman was crying, clawing at the cord around her neck. She tore away at the air, trying to strike the attacker, but failing. Her face was reddening, consuming the pale flesh like some kind of disease. Nac applied more pressure, more pulling, starting to feel himself wear out. But it would be fine. The woman's face went blue, her eyes rolled, her tongue lying lazily over her bottom lip, and her breathing stopped, succinctly. As Nac eased up, loosening the cord from around her neck, she slumped over. Her long mass of blonde hair covered her head, arms, and half her back. Stumbling backwards, Nac grasped for a chair. He almost fell over, but Ray and Nid came to catch him. He was huffing and puffing, his wife and daughter very concerned for him. They brought him to one of the booths on the other side of the diner. He was catching his breath, starting to feel a little better. Not up to talking, Nac pointed frantically to the woman's lifeless body. Although he could not get his words out, the message was crystal clear. For the love of God, get that body out of here before someone sees it. Nid and Ray rushed over to the woman, Ray stepping over to the other end of the booth. She picked up the woman's legs, and Nid grabbed the woman's arms. The woman looked like a low-hanging hammock and swung sort of like one too. Nac, at last, returned to normal breathing. He was afraid that he was going to have a heart attack one of these days. Unlike his victim, he would live on this day. Feeling confident, Nac rose to his feet. At that very moment, a party of 3 came walking through the door. Nac smiled at them, all regulars, asking where they would like to sit. Ray and Nid carried the woman's body into a small room in the back. There was a strip mattress on the floor, other than a small table and a unitary light bulb dangling from the ceiling. The room was barren. Nid and Ray threw the woman's body into the mattress, watching it bounce. They wiped away sweat from their brows. After closing the door, the two went to go help Nac. They had customers waiting. After some unknown time later, the woman awoke. She had not died after all. Maybe she had passed out for her own good. Maybe Nac had got a little too weak to handle the job. She did not know why they took her. The room smelled dank. It was warmer than the outside, but not by much. Her whispered echoes off the wall like a sonar. She became silent, not quite balling up to the fatal position. The woman swayed back and forth like a rocking chair. Her eyes were huge, her pupils small. She thought she might go out of her mind. Inane light bulb buzzes irritated her and slowly compromised her sanity. Someone was opening the door. The sudden sound jabbed into the silence, scaring her silly. She had gotten more frightened but could still think. Her best chance was to make a sprint to the door. No matter who it was or how big they were, she could push them out of the way or slip past them if she was fast enough. She hung on every second the door creaked slowly open. In came the visitor. It was nobody she has ever seen in the diner. He was about 7 feet tall. Abnormal, musculature adorned his body. He was pale white with black hair, same as his sister, and what his mother used to be. When he smiled, his teeth were long and yellow, like watered-down mustard. They clashed at the bizarre angle, the long teeth almost curving as it defied the lower teeth. One arm was much longer than the other. His posture was hunchbacked perfectly. Notably short legs, poked at the knees so precisely they could have cut someone. After standing there admiring the woman, the person spoke.
Hello. My name is Labin, and I can see you survived. That's rare. That's also not a good thing, you know?
Labin made her aware, locking the door before coming closer. She screamed at the top of her lungs. It deterred Labin not in the least. She remained frozen on the bed. Fleeing did not sound like a feasible option at this point. That man or thing, she told herself. The way he moved and how his long arms bobbed side to side, as if it was not attached at the shoulder.
Don't scream. It only annoys me. But I must apologize for my father's sloppy work. He's getting on in the years, you know. I'm sorry. You're gonna have to be alive through all this.
Labin said contritely, crying crocodile tears. He raised her off the bed by her arm. She kicked and flailed wildly as he lifted, his mouth open wide, but it was soon closed. Labin bit into her, knowing how only human flesh could satisfy him. Business picked up briskly for nearly 3 weeks straight. There was not a slow day in the bunch. Nac and Nid loved all the money they were making. Ray thought it was nice to get 10% of tips. Some days, that amounted to $40, sometimes to $50. They were busy. From the morning until the evening, some days. Lots of usual clientele of truckers and cops, but also some new faces. They did quite well. On the 4th week, business took a nosedive. Not one came in all morning. Nac supposed this might be good. Labin could not go on for another month without human flesh, and that was coming up soon. Then, as has happened regularly since they took ownership, a newcomer came calling. That was good. A police officer stepped inside. That was bad. Nac was kicking himself. Nac put on an amiable smile. His inclinations about killing this man the moment he saw were privy to no one. Murdering a police officer was different. Nac remembered reading somewhere that it was automatically the death penalty. He did not know that it was a big truth or a little lie in the great state of Montana, but it still unnerved him. Even pointing the customer to their seat caused him to break out in hives. His badge identified him as Officer Harris. He was a little stocky with broad shoulders. Baby fine, sandy brown hair grew in swirls over the scalp it had lost its hair decades ago. Officer Harris was in his early 50s, but easily looked younger. He had worked for the Custer County Sheriff's Office. These were details that Nac took in consideration, each one more tempting than the last that talked him out of murder. Officer Harris took a menu, which Nac had absentmindedly handed him. Since taking over the business, such procedures had become a reflex. He was speechless when the officer had made a request for some hot chocolate. Nac did hear the order, however, hurrying off to fulfill it. He nearly crashed through the swinging doors into the kitchen. Nid came up hoping to discuss the game plan. If their son went a month without eating someone, he would go berserk. He would scream and thrash all about, breaking things. Devouring his family was off the menu. They will have to do something quickly before things get out of hand. Nac, not wanting to take on the law, proposed the idea of finding some hitchhiker or camper out in the wilderness. Nid shot him down, scolding him about his health and how they would ever pull it off with only a small car between the three of them. Nac needed time to think. He prepared the hot chocolate, spraying the whipped cream and placing the marshmallow on top. Coming back on the table, he brought it to the officer. He thanked Nac, ready to take a sip. Just before Nac could leave, the police officer called out to him. Nac literally walked in reverse, like rewound stock footage. Officer Harris took out a few pieces of paper out of a satchel that he has been holding. So strung out, Nac had not noticed that the officer had been holding anything when he entered the diner. On the table were photocopies of 3 missing person posters. Nac's eyes dried, becoming enlarged. Splayed out before him were the 3 victims: the student, the truck driver, and the blonde woman. Accompanying their pictures was a slew of identifying features: height, weight, race, and gender. Nac believed he would faint. He had grown accustomed to killing people to feed his son ever since he had an accident with a poorly buried radioactive silo long before they bought the Grand Bear. Yet, seeing these posters made him queasy and uneasy. Officer Harris asked him if he knew anything about the strange disappearances. There were no mentions of a blonde woman or truck driver's vehicles. Each family member removed the victim's car keys, driver's license, and purse or wallets. Nac would remove any money for the family to keep. He would use a pair of scissors to cut IDs, driver's license, credit cards, debit cards, and other personal effects that would trace back to the family. Nid or Nac would drive the vehicles out of the parking lot. They would go 5 or 10 miles or sometimes more to abandon the victims' vehicles. There was the first time they fed Labin, a truck driver. Needless to say, they had their work cut out for them. Having to ditch a huge truck and all its gasoline, Nac did it during the dead of night. Count himself lucky as hell that he did not topple over in the behemoth and be blown sky high in 8 different directions. Even him not getting pulled over was a small miracle. He imagined how a brush of the law could end it all. They would discover that this vehicle was owned by a certain company and that the company would let slip that he was not employed by them. Luckily, the first victim in the new business was the college student with no car. He didn't even have a driver's license. Nac wished they were all that easy. This was a medley of thoughts and considerations swirl around his head. Officer Harris had to snap him out of his trance and bring it back to reality. Nac came to immediately, all sweaty and nervous. He leaned down, taking a closer look. That is all to say that he was trying to maintain the illusion that he was looking at the photos. In actuality, he studied the items at the end of the table. He replied,
No.
Removing his gaze from the sugar dispenser, Officer Harris added that the witnesses had seen the student walking beside the road. Roughly a mile down the road was the last person anyone has ever seen him. Nac suggested the man ran off, maybe went to a nearby woods. Lots of hitchhikers got lost that way, Nac mentioned. Officer Harris watched him silently with the same glare someone would use on somebody else who told an offensive joke. Nac smiled hesitantly, hoping his jitters were not obvious. Officer Harris paused before nodding his head approvingly.
Thank you. I appreciate your cooperation.
Officer Harris responded with a gentle yet dignified voice. He then sipped some of his hot chocolate, now only lukewarm with half whipped cream melted. Before he can leave, Nac heard his voice again.
Oh, wait a minute.
Nac returned, wondering what he could want this time. He thought he was in big trouble now. Nac would have been remiss if he did not admit that confessing outright was a tantalizing proposition. Just as Nac began to speak, Officer Harris chimed in.
Bacon cheeseburger with a side of french fries, cheddar, no pickles, cook it medium well, please.
Officer Harris said, smiling, chumly, handing Nac the menu back.
Good choice, sir.
Nac replied, collecting the menu as he tried to memorize the order. Nac practically fled. Missing posters were a big game changer. Plans to slay his cop were getting flimsier by the moment. Rushing back into the kitchen, he encountered Nid. She had her arms crossed. Her natural white hair was starting to show at the roots, like some natural trying to flush unnatural poison out of his system.
So, what will it be? Are you gonna ice him or not? You know he's gonna hear Labin soon enough and come looking into things he wished he hadn't. We can't kill a cop, Nid. Everyone will be looking for him. Everyone. Not to mention that it's the death penalty. Besides, making a police cruiser disappear without being noticed, not a good chance.
Nac countered reasonably.
Ah, I see your points. We're already going to get the death penalty for all the people we did murder. If you really have trouble with the policeman's car, then either paint it black or I'll get rid of it if you're so scared. And, oh yeah, if he doesn't get his meal this month, he's going to eat us. And us escaping, not a good chance.
Nid retorted harshly.
Fine, I'll do it. But you gotta make his meal first. He wants a cheddar cheeseburger with bacon and some french fries, cooked medium well. When he's eating, that'll be the perfect time. He'll be more distracted, and then I'll have the opportunity to strike.
Fine, but the weapon better be the right one. You're getting on in years, and I don't need you to have a heart attack because you decided someone was better left strangled.
I will. Don't worry.
I won't. You know what you're doing. I love you.
Nid reminded him.
I love you too.
Nac said back, kissing her. 10 minutes later, lunch was ready. Nac was serving it to Officer Harris. Normally Ray would have done it, but she was too busy doing schoolwork. That was okay because Nac would have wanted to observe the officer eating when he let his guard down. He placed the plate in front of the officer, putting one ball of ketchup and another of mustard on the table for his convenience. Scurrying away, Nac watched him from behind the counter. 5 more minutes had passed. The officer appeared content to be munching on his meal. Nac decided this would be the time to strike. He got his shotgun from under the counter. In hindsight, it might not have been the best or safest place to put it, but there you had it. Nid gave Nac her reading chair. It was not terribly sturdy, but it would do. Nac creeped up slowly on the officer. He happened to choose the same booth as the blonde woman. Being on his tippy toes and firing a shotgun just was not feasible, so he brought the chair. He lowered his weapon, watching warily as he approached cautiously. The chair was placed right behind the booth. When he set it down, Officer Harris grumbled. This sent shockwaves into Nac's brain, pouring out anxiety. But he moved onward and literally upward. Seeing the officer turn his attention back to the book that he had procured from his satchel, Nac stepped up on the chair. He immediately started to lose balance. Officer Harris grunted again, paralyzing Nac mid-sway. Another page on his book was turned. Another bite of his generously large bacon cheeseburger was taken. Another fry nibbled, but nothing more. Balance was restored as Nac came flat on his feet on the chair. He firmly gripped on the shotgun with both hands. It was now or never. He had to do it. Pointing his shotgun down, Nac took aim. His eye was looking down at Officer Harris and his burger. It had pickles. Nac now remembered forgetting to tell his wife no pickles. But the officer was well into his burger and paid the pickles no mind. So Nac assumed he was safe. The barrel of the shotgun was pointing right at the center of Harris's thin crown. Nac hesitated but carried on. His finger was finally on the trigger. Pulling it seemed so hard, so heavy, and burdensome. His finger fidgeted fiercely. Officer Harris was in the middle of attending to some ketchup on his face. He almost reached for napkins but stopped reaching. In the metallic reflection of the napkin dispenser, he saw something long, aimed at the back of his head. Officer Harris's instincts took over. He fled the booth for dear life. Nac had not registered the officer's movement quickly enough when he discharged the shotgun, blowing up the table in splinter storm. The plate cracked in half. Bits of his bacon cheeseburger flew in 6 directions. French fry rainfall pelted the floor. Its cold hot chocolate was splattered all over the other seat. Light smoke billowed from the decimated booth. Nac recoiled, holding the shotgun while trying to keep the dust out of his eyes. Officer Harris was looking at him with the shotgun, making no mistake that the stranger intended to kill him. He would also bet his home and pension on a silver platter that this guy was responsible for the killings. Officer Harris pulled his weapon, aiming it at Nac. When the dust cleared, Nac saw Officer Harris with his pistol. He tried to turn around to shoot, but the shotgun was so weighty and Nac so clumsy that it felt like swinging an oversized rake. Officer Harris shot Nac once in the chest. He convulsed and fell immediately over. His head hit the tile hard. It did not matter because he was already dead. Officer Harris leaned his mouth over the radio, held the button, and called for backup at the Grand Bear Diner near Highway 94. Nac's blood spilled out from his chest in a rapidly expanding pool that was gaining ground fast. His left hand was clutched around the shotgun, but only loosely so. A loud sound followed by a crash rang out. Officer Harris looked up to see Nid holding a pistol. He ducked for cover, forever grateful that she was a lousy shot. One booth up from another that was obliterated by his only choice. Another bullet buzzed past. She shot a sugar dispenser clean off his table. Lousy aim indeed. But Officer Harris has been in shootouts much bigger than this one, and he was no lousy shot. A third bullet hit a little closer. From the sounds of it, he could tell it met the tile. He looked up briefly to see a bullet mark indented on the floor. His trajectory training taught him that she must have fired that shot closer if it was closer to her direction. Officer Harris decided to take a chance, praying that he would make the right call. Poking his head out and readying his pistol, it appeared that she was gearing up to move closer and take another awful shot. Her focus was askew momentarily, but that was all he needed. He shot her in the head. About another inch above her nose, she fell back, dying before she hit the floor. Blood escaped from the back of her head, hastily. The gun flung out of her hand, clacking its way to the other side of the diner. Back and forth, his head bobbled. It seemed as though the threat had been abated. There was silence. Officer Harris got up to retrieve a satchel. It was under the blown-up table, covered in pieces of wood, but otherwise unscathed. His book had burst into smithereens. Officer Harris was annoyed that he would have to spend another $32 just to finish the other half of the book. He was happier to have his life, though. He stepped over the dead bodies as best he could. Contaminated the crime scene would have been bad. Then again, he was part of the crime scene and a witness. Better safe than sorry. He avoided the bodies and all the blood like it was an infectious disease. Walking up to the kitchen, his eagle eye spotted movement. Faint, but there. Suddenly, Ray came charging out of the kitchen. She had a butter knife in her hand. Her youthful face was scrunched up in rage, making her appear much older. She bared her teeth like a rabid animal. Ray charged towards the officer. He silently mouthed, "Are you kidding me?" She tried to advance, but Officer Harris shot her dead in the chest from 10 feet away. The knife flew out of her hand. Her body landed on the swinging doors, slumping against them. Officer Harris could not believe that someone would try a knife. Hoping that was the last of them, Officer Harris proceeded the front doors so he could wait for backup, and they could search the premises together. He won 3 times, but 4 might not be happening. Before he could push the door open, he heard a loud scream. It was human, yet sounded like some kind of wild beast. A gorilla? Officer Harris thought. It was not impossible with everything that unfolded in the last 20 minutes. A towering figure came through the kitchen. Officer Harris spotted him easily and had his pistol ready. Labin pushed open the doors. His sister's body was flung 5 feet. Labin looked at her. She was dead. He looked over to see his father and mother dead. Then, he looked at Officer Harris, the only one still alive, holding the gun. The only one who could have done it. Labin presumed correctly, though he knew not the reasons.
You killed my family! You killed them! You must die!
Labin roared, louder than a lion. He charged towards Officer Harris. The sight of Labin was not fully registered with Officer Harris before it was scooped up in Labin's long arms and thrown clean through one of the diner's windows. He tried to shoot Labin, but missed. Officer Harris landed between 20 feet outside the pavement, gasping in pain. Falling did more damage than the defensation. Labin was ogling his handiwork from behind the smashed diner window. He swooped around and came out the front door. Labin charged towards the officer, but was caught off guard. Something hit him. Then another something, followed by another. Police were shooting at him. Gunshots were quite painful, but the radiation had given superhuman threshold for pain. The cavalry had arrived. A salvo of gunfire prompted Labin to retreat into the diner.
Alan, are you all right? What happened?
Another officer asked, kneeling down beside Officer Harris.
Well, Tom, thankfully the ground broke my fall. But seriously, feel awful.
Officer Harris groaned as he tried to get on his feet. He managed to slowly come up. Tom helped him off the ground. Officer Harris was tremendously sore, yet thought he could manage. Tom helped him over to one of the 3 police cruisers parked miscellaneously at conflicting angles all around the parking lot. When a shootout was going down, parking in parallel lines would just not do. 5 police officers were practically hidden behind police cars, aiming with their firearms at the diner. Tom was the 6th, arriving with his partner, holstering his gun in favor of a microphone. Officer Harris updated him on the details, but could not provide the perp's name, since the latter was too busy using the former as a human rock. Tom tried his best.
Hey. Yeah, you in the diner in there. We've got the place surrounded. Come out with your hands up and maybe we can end this peacefully. We know that your family is dead. That does not mean that this has to go down with you dying. Just give up and surrender.
Tom's amplified voice pleased, filling the immediate vicinity with resounding words. There was silence. All the police officers had their weapons drawn, pointed directly at the diner. There was no clear shot of Labin, so all eyes were watching the movement inside. Officer Harris was still in bad pain, but was able to watch. He was in the back seat of a police cruiser with the door open. His legs were touching the ground. Moving was not a viable option at this time, which meant he was sitting there and trying to enjoy the show. A booth came flying out of the broken window. Police officers scattered as it crashed into one of the cruisers. The hood was crushed inward, with the booth sticking out of it at an obtuse angle. Labin let out a roar that swooped across the parking lot, like some demented declaration of dominance. Police officers looked at each other for what to do next, nobody volunteering to take a lead. They had never encountered something so strong. Objects had been thrown at their way before, but never a booth. It did not help their cause that the perp could be shot so many times and live to tell about it. Tom gave up and tossed the megaphone in his trunk, shouting expletives. Officer Harris was not blaming him at least. He was curious to know if Labin could even be killed. The other officers turned to Tom, as did Officer Harris for guidance. Tom had to decide quickly if they should try to take down Labin, or if they should go inside and rush him. It would take a lot of bullets to kill that man, but Tom was confident that it would work. Then, he remembered there was a couple of spare tear bag bombs left over from the riot police that had broken up a month back. Strict mandates dedicated that officers return unused items for future use. This would surely result in a write-up or possibly a suspension. But given the circumstances, they were just too damn convenient to not use. Opening his trunk again, Tom retrieved one of the tear gas bombs. He placed it in Officer Harris's competent hands, urging him to make an honorary toss. Officer Harris stood up. His pain was bad, but better. Instead of moving towards the door, he limped over to the broken window. Officers moved out of the way, admiring his bravery. When he was about 10 feet away, he stopped. Standing ached his muscles, but he was proud to do this. Officer Harris's face was deadpan. Hurling the tear gas bomb, he flung it right into the broken window. Injured or not, his throw was impressive. Everybody watched, unable to see what was unfolding inside the diner. Tear gas had landed only a few feet from where Labin was standing. A cloud of noxious gas sped around the diner like a hazardous smog. Labin took it into his lungs and eyes. He cried torrentially, shimmering tears encircling his eyes. Hacks and coughs left his mouth in droves, rendering it difficult for him to breathe. All the officers had their guns pointed at the door. Officer Harris had not moved. Tom now had his firearm ready. Smoke began to flow out the diner, from beneath the double doors, and out through the broken window. A moment later, Labin came out, ripping the door off its hinges. Tom's command to open fire came off his tongue as swiftly as a bird taking flight. Labin shook and twisted and fatigued under the strain of bombarding firepower. He began to bleed. Wounds wept in thin, burgundy streams. When most of the officers ran out of ammo and rushed to reload, most recalling their training from the academy, Labin picked up one of the officers whose escape was too slow. He lifted the officer off the ground with every intention to pitch him like a fleshy baseball. Terminating the plan was the officer's quick doing. He managed to pull his mace out, spraying into the aggressor's eyes. Labin's eyes were burning. It was worse than tear gas, temporarily blinding only, complementing his agony. Labin dropped to his knees, grasping his eyes like it was his life-saving medicine out of his reach. The officers had all reloaded. Tom gave them the go-ahead to commence firing. A barrage of bullets pelted him in a fearsome fusillade. He could not defend himself the way he was. Blood plotted out of his skin in squirts. Every bullet drove its shares out. Before some of the police officers went to replace their cartridges, Labin fell face first into the gravel. His butt stuck up as his face went planted against the pavement, and his arms were lying flat. Tom instructed the others to stand down. He wanted to make sure the perp was dead. But Officer Harris had different plans. Walking up to Labin, he cocked his pistol, aimed it directly at the back of Labin's head, and fired into his skull. Blood and brain matter sprayed out into the pavement in thin branches. Labin collapsed on his side. Officer Harris remained motionless and emotionless. Inside, he felt proud. 3 people had gone justice. He would live to see another day. So would his friend Tom, and the rest of the officers on the scene. Then he thought of paperwork. All the red tape, all the questioning, all the explaining. How would they explain a 7-foot cannibal with abnormal strength and durability thrown in a booth like that was a frisbee? That the perp's family tried to kill the officer during lunch. But that would all be for later. Much later. Tom holstered his gun. He wore a look of slight shock, but not sheer surprise like a Halloween mask. Rather than to confront him, Tom went over to comfort Officer Harris. Tom asked his friend if he was all right for the second time that day. Officer Harris turned with wide eyes, gaping. He answered that he was okay with words that were a smidgen softer than a whisper. Tom nodded his head. He stepped away from Officer Harris and Labin's body to talk to his fellow officers. Subsequent to that was dialing 911 for paramedical assistance. A snow kicked up. Snow clouds had formed overhead during the standoff. There were light layers of powder covering everything in sight. It formed on Officer Harris's coat and atop his swirling hair, but he did not care. He only cared about Labin, even though he never caught his name. Something grabbed his attention. There was something glowing green coming from the back of Labin's head.
Good night, farewell, and remember, don't get lost in the dark.